Math was never our strong suit, but breaking down Ohio State football is. Sit back and join us for Buckeye Grove Instant Access, part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network.
You can do it!
Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. Post-game thoughts, immediate analysis, and much, much more to put the big game into perspective. Without any further delay of game, here's your host, Kevin Noon.
Kevin, goddammit.
Hey, welcome to the BIA podcast. I am your host, Kevin Noon. I'll be joined by Griffin Strom here in a minute, and it is the Friday edition of the big show. We are a little bit more than 2 weeks away from the start of the Ohio State and Big Ten season, and it can't get here soon enough. And we'll talk about the Big Ten in a minute. But, without any further delay, let's bring in Griffin. And Griffin, it's been a busy week, maybe not necessarily as much in terms of there being finite news of this happening or that happening, but we had the opportunity to talk to running backs and defensive line. And on last Saturday, we got into Ohio Stadium and had the opportunity to watch the team stretch at least and go through a couple of drills before they shuffled us off quickly. But, football's in the air.
Yeah, it definitely is. And yeah, starting with that practice last Saturday, I mean, it was a brisk October Saturday morning. There was football going on in Ohio Stadium in some capacity at least, and it really started to feel like a real fall day in Columbus, Ohio. I was getting those same tingly feelings, if you will, that football is almost back. It was a good feeling to see that the practice, even though we didn't get to see much. Obviously we just some warm ups, a few drills, but it was cool to see guys moving around, and just to be back close to a pseudo real football atmosphere at the Horseshoe. So that was sweet. And then this week, like you alluded to, we got to hear from a lot of people that we hadn't necessarily heard from in quite some time. Some of the young guys on the team, older, more mature now, look a little bit different. It really has been many months since we've, heard from the Larry Johnsons of the world and whatnot. So I feel like we did get to learn some good information from those guys as well.
We'll kind of run this in chronological order, and let's get back to Saturday. And I know as I was driving up 315 North, for those of you who make it to games, and I jumped off on King Avenue Medical Center, which is closed during football Saturdays, and I'm like, God, if I could have this type of drive in to every home game, I mean, it would be fantastic, not jockeying through campus and having to cut up High Street and everything else. But yeah, it was really nice to get out there and to hear the whistles going and see the guys in uniform. And we knew going in that it wasn't going to be a situation of where they were going to be like, okay, and this is going to be our short yardage package. But don't tell anybody. Or did they tell us, and we're just keeping it on the DL? No, we're not. And I'll be sure to post a link to our 3-minute video of what we were allowed to shoot in the comment section, both on SoundCloud and on YouTube. Not much that we could really gain from what we saw there. I mean, we know that we didn't see Teron Vincent. There are a couple guys who were missing. Whether it's injury or whatnot, but seeing Justin Fields out there zipping passes around, seeing the freshmen with Jack Miller and with C.J. Stroud, seeing Trey Sermon out there going through some drills. I mean, it certainly made this a little bit more tangible.
Yeah, for sure. And the Teron Vincent injury, we kind of, after that happened this week, confirmed that, his progress is still going slow in terms of his recovery. But then also just some kind of mysterious absences, and Demario McCall. Not that this is, some huge killer in the potential offense for Ohio State, but I didn't find Demario McCall out there during the practice, and it seemed like they switched his position back to running back. So it seems like his situation still might be a little bit fluid in terms of positioning. Who else? I did not see Haskell Garrett there, but I heard afterward, and I was looking for him. I heard afterwards that he was actually there. And then later in the week, Larry Johnson was saying that he has been in practice, but he's just not cleared to do a lot of things. Jalen Harris also I did not see out there. Yeah, other than that, I think a lot of people. One takeaway that I definitely had was that like G. Scott, for example, just looked really big. I thought out there as a true freshman wide receiver. Julian Fleming as well. But really, G. Scott just really looked. His just physical appearance kind of jumped out at me as being like, oh man, like he really does look like an Ohio State football player right now that could jump onto the field and make some plays.
Yeah, exactly. As you were talking, and I was kind of thinking about what I was going to say next. If he doesn't bring up those freshman wide receivers, I will, because they all looked really good. I mean, throwing in Jackson Smith and Jigba as well, and Mookie Cooper. It was a first opportunity to see some of these guys. We were able to see Cameron Martinez on defense, who was an offensive player in high school. I could go through the whole list, and and maybe leave one or two guys out, and that would be a disservice. So we'll just say that these freshmen, they sure stretch well, at least. I mean, we haven't seen them in a football situation, but we'll see coming up here in a couple of weeks with this season not really counting against eligibility. There's no reason to sit there and have to be counting games. If you're ready to play, it's kind of all hands on deck. And, a position, we'll talk about running back, and they do have a true freshman back with Mayan Williams, who really has reshaped his body from high school to, before he even got on campus to now. I mean, he just really is looking good, but it may be a tough road for him to see a lot of playing time with a tandem of Master Teague and Trey Sermon at the top of the depth chart. Steel Chambers getting a lot of mention. Walk-on Xavier Johnson getting a lot of talk to. Marcus Crowley still kind of on the mend. What were your impressions of talking with Tony Alford and, our first opportunity to talk to Trey Sermon?
Yeah, so, Tony Alford was saying that they're kind of leaning towards Master Teague as he's kind of emerging as the vocal leader, although it's not necessarily like one guy in that room. So Trey Sermon has become more vocal, kind of opening up more in the meeting room side of things and the leadership side of things. I guess the most interesting stuff about Trey Sermon, which I definitely could tell from looking at him at the practice the other day, which I'm not sure. I'd seen him play at Oklahoma, obviously, but he does have a different build in comparison to some of the recent Ohio State running backs. And that's what Tony Alford was talking about with us. He's more of an upright running style type of guy because he's like 6'1", 215. He's the same weight as like a Dobbins or a Weber, but he's just he's kind of stretched out more. He's not as low center of gravity, not as bulky as a Zeke or even like a Carlos Hyde. So that's kind of interesting. The fact that they've kind of Alford has kind of gone for a similar pattern of body types when it comes to Ohio State running backs of recent memory. And Trey Sermon does kind of break that mold a little bit. And he was just talking about trying to get him to lower his posture a little bit, run behind his pads. But I wonder how that might create kind of a complementary style with Trey Sermon and Master Teague splitting carries this season. That type of smash and dash or whatever the different names for that type of thing is, because Master Teague's like a solid 225. He's just a huge kind of power guy. Maybe Trey Sermon a little more nimble, a little more straight up and down the field. We will see. What were some of your takeaways from talking to those guys?
Well, I was going to say that my first takeaway that we never really talked about per se was how much would Oklahoma like to have Trey Sermon back right now at this point, as they're sitting at 1-2, and when Kennedy Brooks opted out for the season, that, the guy that, if we're really looking at it, it was the emergence of Kennedy Brooks that really kind of ate into the carries that Trey Sermon was getting there. Now, lo and behold, they don't have him. I've always been a huge Master Teague fan, just because he was one of those types of recruits that he was much more bullish on Ohio State than Ohio State was on him at the beginning. And, if he were from Pickerington or Cleveland or Lima or somewhere in the state, I mean, you could feel that because there are always going to be guys that have grown up watching Ohio State because they're from the state of Ohio. But, you look at Teague and he's out of Murfreesboro, Tennessee, a far suburb of Nashville. I mean, I think for people down there in Tennessee, we're like, hey, it's not really a suburb, but, just for people who don't know the geography of the state, it's kind of in central going south down toward Chattanooga. Just to see him get this opportunity. I mean, I'm going to be really curious to see what he does as 1 or 1A in terms of being the guy carrying the mail, because he came out and he really had a good start to the season last year as JK's backup. And now, that's not going to be there. It's not going to be JK running for 165 and wearing guys out or whatever, but Master Teague is just so impressive in, his actions and his words and everything else. But he also seems like such a quiet guy. You kind of think about what, how is he as a leader? I mean, he's emerging as a leader, but then again, you look at somebody like JT Barrett, who you see him during interviews and you see one guy, and then you see the videos that the university puts out of him in the locker room giving speeches and whatnot. It's like, wow, where the hell did that come from? And you got to wonder if Teague has a little bit of that in him.
Yeah, most definitely. And one thing I thought was interesting that Master Teague was talking about was, at least from conversations that I've had with some Master Teague critics, he even got a question about how I think in the Clemson game and really the final stretch of last season, against some of those better defenses, he kind of had some of his worst performances of the year. I think against Clemson, he had like 7 carries for 9 yards or something like that. Something similar against Michigan, maybe. He really just didn't have those breakout, games that he was having in like second halves against some of the, lesser Big Ten opponents. Those openings were not presenting themselves for Master Teague at the end of last season. And that was kind of could give you a little bit of cause for concern about, him stepping into that starting role. But he was talking about how in rehabbing from his latest Achilles injury this past spring, he's really been trying to put a focus on becoming more agile. Because if you kind of watch his running style, he's just a huge guy. But you don't see a lot of shake and bake, if you will, in comparison to a J.K. Dobbins, at least from my eyes, and watching him last year. And he was really talking about trying to improve his agility, which to me sounds like he's trying to work on, shaking guys out of their shoes a little bit or getting a little bit of wiggle in his running style. But that would definitely be a huge help for Ohio State for sure.
Absolutely, and I'm sure we could go on and on about the running backs and so on, but let's keep moving, and let's move to Larry Johnson and the defensive line. We got a chance to speak to them on Wednesday, and of course, everybody wants to know life after Chase Young. What does that look like? But when you just sat there and you looked at the roster of guys that they rolled out for us, and you talked to Zach Harrison and Tyreek Smith and Tyler Friday, and I mean, I know not all these guys are on the edge, and Javante Jean-Baptiste, Antoine Jackson, and you're like, wow, I mean, they still have some dudes. They may not have. I think Zach Harrison grows into that role. I think Jonathan Cooper, who we didn't speak to, but we've spoken to about 6,000 times during his Ohio State career, I think he could have a really breakout type of season as well. But they don't necessarily have that one focal point. But in some ways, that's almost more dangerous, to where you have to account for everybody. But that's not me saying that they're going to come out and have 50 sacks over 9 games or anything like that.
Right, and that's what Tyler Friday was talking about, that Larry Johnson has kind of been revving their engines a little bit about how, you guys are a bunch of no-name guys, and that should be exciting for you because, people aren't maybe expecting, outside of maybe Zach Harrison, aren't expecting, a breakout season from you guys, but any of them really could have that season this year, especially with how Larry Johnson was talking about how much time that all of them are going to see. He kind of said that all 5 of his primary defensive ends are starting caliber guys. You're talking about, obviously, Cooper, Harrison, Smith, Friday, and Jean-Baptiste. and it'll be interesting to see how those guys are. He said that all 5 of them will start at different points of the season, which isn't that surprising because last year I think those guys, all the class of 2018 guys, all like had the same amount of starts and stuff like that. So that wasn't all that surprising this year necessarily.
Right, and
but there's definitely.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and it'll be interesting once we get into the season to look at the weekly snap counts that Pro Football Focus provides to us to see kind of where things are. And there just certainly will be games that lend themselves to certain configurations. There'll be certain instances that require the Rushman package to be out there more. But, I think by the time we get to the end of the year or the end of the season, which, if you're an Ohio State fan, you hope goes through mid-January, I think those numbers will end up being pretty even unless, some guys come out, far and away and prove that they just can't be taken off the field. But that just hasn't been Larry Johnson's MO in terms of, when he's had Chase Young, the Bosas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't remember which player it was, but I do remember him saying it just, I go out there and I can go as hard as I want for X amount of plays, knowing that the next guy's going to come and be able to go as hard as he wants, and that the offensive tackle across from him is just going to be like, oh, shoot. And I kind of snickered at that point on the Zoom call, but that just seems to be kind of the prevailing thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting though because these guys are all returning and whatnot. But last year, I think the most sacks that any one defensive end had out of the bunch was Zach Harrison with like 3.5. And there was a lot of other players that had more sacks that weren't defensive ends. Obviously, you had Chase Young kind of had the lion's share of the sack production, of course. But then you had 2 different defensive tackles in Devon Hamilton and Jayshon Cornell were like 2nd and 3rd or 2nd and 4th in sacks. Baron Browning might have been 3rd in sacks. All those guys had more sacks than any other defensive end not named Chase Young. So there will have to be a step up in production from those guys. Obviously, they'll have a lot more opportunities without Chase Young out there to make their imprint. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of stuff going on the defensive line. I don't know if you wanted to transition into talking about some of the interior guys as well.
Yeah, sitting here, I keep looking at the time, like, oh my God, we're already 17 minutes in. We haven't even gotten to our other topic here on this first half. But yeah, for equal billing, I mean, we do need to talk about the defensive tackle position and, the importance of the 3-tech and whatnot, and how we might see some guys have to slide in, because you do lose a lot from last year with Devon Hamilton and BB Landers and Jayshon Cornell. And obviously they are a little short-handed, as Haskell Garrett, unless something miraculous happens, probably won't be ready by the start of the season or whatnot. And you just have to wonder, after such a scary incident and whatnot, when he's going to be able to get out there and get that medical clearance, and not only get the medical clearance, but be cleared to go in terms of being football ready. But it's going to be important for Ohio State to be stout, across the line. They just can't have all these dudes on the end. They need to have the guys on the interior, because that just sets the table.
Yeah, and it was kind of interesting when Larry Johnson was talking about the depth at the 2 different defensive tackle positions. Well, first of all, he said that Togiai and Antoine Jackson right now are his 2 guys. He said that what was it? He said that everything that they're doing right now is basically based on what those guys are doing, which basically just tells you that Togiai is going to be starting at the nose. Antoine Jackson sounds like the 3-tech guy right now. It was interesting though, because it seemed like he rattled off a lot of names when talking about 3-tech guys, because that's Haskell Garrett, Teron Vincent as well, and then the Jaden McKenzie's of the world, and guys, even Ty Hamilton. He said that they're working him out at the nose, but that he might be a 3-tech in the long run. And it seems like there's less depth at the nose, and he even said like it seemed like Antoine Jackson might even be the backup option to Togiai at the nose. He said he could move him around as well. But maybe that just speaks to his confidence in Togiai in that nose position. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you kind of like looked at my own notes, if I actually went to the time to write out notes of what I kind of took away with that. And, I kind of was thinking about just that Togiai is going to have to carry the mail some, and that, Ty Hamilton is going to be somebody who really could be thrust into into the fire here. And he's not Devon Hamilton. He's a different, he's a different body type, but there certainly are the football genes there between the two brothers. And I think that Ty really could, shape up to have a pretty impactful first season, especially if they do find a way to get him in the mix there in the middle. But they certainly don't have as much of a known rotation at this point when it comes to the two interior positions.
Yeah, it's also interesting because Ty Hamilton's just a 3-star guy, and like an in-state recruit. So he really has seemed to get a lot of mention from even Ryan Day, like in his radio appearances and stuff with the local media and whatnot. He's thrown out the name Ty Hamilton, which I don't know if you necessarily would have expected that coming in from a 3-star in-state guy, but obviously, there's the Devon Hamilton connection as well. And I think they're seeing a lot from Ty Hamilton early on, which is good to hear for Ohio State fans, of course.
Yeah, and my last thought on that, what was the ranking of Big Brother Devon? 3 stars. So it seemed to work there pretty well. But we'll shift gears, and we'll talk about this in more depth on another podcast down the line. But we're a little bit more than 2 weeks away from the Big Ten, and I know that this is kind of the chance that we've all had to start really familiarizing ourselves with the rest of the conference. And I think my attention is really drawn to the West because, I like to think I know the East pretty well. I mean, that's who Ohio State plays. They play all of them every year. There's no rotation or anything like that. But one of the big storylines that's kind of jumped out to me, I was reading our sister site, our Nebraska site in the Rivals Network this morning, and everybody talks about Adrian Martinez this and Adrian Martinez that, but he's really getting pushed by Luke McCaffrey there at quarterback, and I don't buy that they would make a change, especially week one. But I've certainly seen games where Martinez has not been effective, and I've seen games where he's been extremely effective. And I do think that if Ohio State is able to stymie Martinez, that I think we could see 2 quarterbacks in that type of situation if they really think that highly of him, because he certainly offers up, some different skills.
That is very interesting. And you talk about the kind of Jekyll and Hyde situation with Martinez, and you can just look to the last 2 games the Nebraska's played against Ohio State alone to kind of see the differences there. The 2018 game was very close. On the 2019 game, I think he threw for like 40 yards or something through the air. He might have had as many he threw like three interceptions in the first half, I want to say. If you can recall back to that. He might have had as many interceptions as completions at one point in that game, I think. So it was definitely a disappointing season for him last year. But yeah, that is kind of concerning for people, kind of because Adrian Martinez is really like almost a Heisman dark horse last year. The way some people were talking about him ahead of the season. Obviously, once the season got underway, that kind of changed pretty quickly. But that's pretty concerning. I'm not as familiar with the quarterback situation there with the backups and whatnot. But I wonder if that speaks to the confidence that they have in the other guy coming up more, or if that speaks to the fact that Martinez isn't making the improvements or strides that they would be hoping to see from him at this stage and into his 3rd year.
And sticking with quarterbacks, news out of Madison that's come out over the last week, and Jack Cohn, returning starter, is down and had surgery, I believe, on his foot. So that means the emergence of I believe he redshirted last year, so we'll just say redshirt freshman Graham Mertz. And, the Badgers are not on Ohio State's schedule at this point. You never know what could happen in that 9th week, but it certainly does change the complexion of the Badgers. And for the sake of full disclosure, I've never been sold on Cone, and I personally think it's kind of an addition by subtraction situation, because I've always been very high on Mertz, and I know Ohio State was very high on Mertz. That the cycle that he came through as a recruit, he was one of the few quarterbacks right out of the gate that Ohio State was like fully all in on. And I think that Wisconsin suddenly not going to abandon the run. They suddenly didn't go out and get themselves a Julian Fleming or G. Scott or anybody like that. So they certainly are not as explosive on offense, but I think that Wisconsin certainly doesn't miss a beat in terms of ability with this move. They certainly will lose a lot in terms of experience, as Jack Cohn has been there in that program for several years and has a lot of starts under his belt.
Yeah, and usually that would be a big sign of concern that Cone has to be a senior by now, right?
Maybe like 12th year senior.
Exactly, exactly. Usually that would seem like a huge concern, losing a guy, that's been in a Big Ten championship game, that's, had years of experience, playing the quarterback position. Hearing that he's going to be out indefinitely would seem like a big concern. But from what I've seen, the response from a lot of people, and it seems like yourself included, is that maybe this is actually a good thing for the team and kind of unlocking a little bit more potential. Because I think, you've kind of seen the ceiling for Jack Cohn in a very traditional Wisconsin quarterback type of way. And he did look good in the first half against Ohio State, obviously in the Big Ten championship game. But I think you kind of know what he brings to the table. And I've seen a lot of people kind of excited about the fact that Mertz is going to go in there now and see what he's going to do.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of the West, and then of course in the East, Ohio State. The overwhelming prohibitive favorite. I think it's all well. And this will be the last point we'll talk about here. Again, I promise we'll do a couple of Big Ten preview shows leading in to the opening action, the 23rd and 24th. But it all really shapes up to what that week 2 game in State College is going to look like, in my opinion. I know that I know they're saying all the right things in Ann Arbor, and that how Joe Milton is William Wallace incarnate, part Cam Newton, part Zeus. I mean, the August anticipation and expectations of Michigan may be coming out here in October, but that's only based on because the fact that the season hasn't started yet. Honestly, I think it's a 2-team race, and Ohio State has been given quite the head start, and it's going to be that Penn State game, and I'm just going to really be curious when it comes to what Ohio State is not playing against a tomato can in week 1 with Nebraska, but they certainly aren't starting Michigan, Penn State, or anything along those lines, or starting, if they were in the SEC, they're not going Alabama, LSU to start the year. They're going to get a nice tune-up, and then they're going to get that tough game right there in week 2. Who do you think benefits more from playing that game in week 2 versus week 7 when you take into account that neither team, each team will have had 4 quarters of competitive football leading into that game since playing in January. Both teams probably only had about 2 to 4 spring practices, have been under the same set of guidelines in terms of the return to play. I'm not going to say that either team's going to come out and be humming like you would expect a team playing on Halloween night during a normal year.
Yeah, and so Penn State starts off with Indiana, correct? In their week 1 match.
That sounds right. I don't have the schedule in front of me.
Yeah, so Ohio State and Penn State are both kind of starting with similar caliber opponents, I would say, kind of middle of the road Big Ten teams. So it's not like one of them, starting off with just and not to overlook either of those teams, but neither of them is going to be coming into that week 2 game with, coming off of the heels of, a knockdown, drag 'em out brawl, we would think at least. And so from that respect, that should be pretty even. However, I would just tend to think that early on in the season, especially with all the variables happening now, that an early season matchup could favor a more unpredictable outcome, just because we haven't seen these teams get to their final form. You know what I mean? So I would think early on in the season that you might see, maybe even the underdog benefit a little bit. I hate to say it for Ohio State fans, but however, it's also likely that earlier on in the season you're going to have more people that are going to be not affected by some of the COVID issues that might start to pick up as the season goes on. I mean, we're seeing it in the NFL right now. The first couple of weeks it was all good, all sunshine and roses. But now, as the season has gone on, there's been some issues, and so I would think that in week 2 everything would be good from that perspective, in terms of the Ohio State Penn State game, and so maybe that does make things a little more predictable as well. But I guess those are just my early first reaction thoughts about that question.
Yeah, I agree there, and we're going to get to a break here in a second, but I think that you sit there and the first thing I would go to is quarterback play, but Penn State is bringing back a returning starter as well, and Sean Clifford. So then I kind of look at just some of the other key factors in terms of how are they going to score, whatnot, and then Ohio State certainly loses a lot with a 2,000-yard rusher in J.K. Dobbins, but I think both teams have very strong running games. I just think that the Ohio State receiving core is going to be deeper, just in a wide margin compared to about anybody that they could potentially play this year. I think that bodes well, and I just don't know if Penn State, by its 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th quarters of football of the year, are going to be able to put enough pressure on an Ohio State secondary that I think all Buckeye fans are very curious to see how it will perform with, really only one returning name with Shaun Wade coming back. Ohio State most years is able to take away the run from many of its opponents. We talked about the D-line at length. They're going to have to replace some dudes there, but if it gets into a situation of where it's Penn State's passing game against Ohio State's secondary, because I don't know if Ohio State's going to be able to get a ton of pressure to begin with. I don't know what that's going to look like immediately. I know for many years, even when some of the games were close between Ohio State and Penn State, that Penn State's offensive line wasn't necessarily where they wanted it to be. I think that game could be a sneaky good game. I still like Ohio State by a couple of scores in it, but it's easy for me to sit there and say that here several 3 weeks away from that game. Let me see Ohio State and let me see Penn State play their week 1 game. Let me see how rosters look based on everything that's going on in the world. Plus 2, knock on wood, you never want to speak anything into existence. We saw a rash of injuries in the NFL when they took away their preseason games. And while preseason games aren't necessarily a part of, they're not part of the NC2A structure, you still have to wonder, since these guys, while they've certainly had an ample ramp-up process, didn't have spring football, didn't have a lot of the things they normally would during the summer. So, there are a lot of variables that we can't predict.
Without a doubt, for sure, yeah.
Well, let's jump to a quick break here, and we'll talk about, we'll do a speed round to finish up the show, talking about a couple of the big games this upcoming weekend. But first, a quick word from one of our great sponsors.
Egg Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HAGUE H2O.com.
Welcome back to the BIA podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. I'm joined by staff writer Griffin Strom as we talk about all things Buckeyes. And honestly, in this show, not everything has been able to be about the Buckeyes. We're still a couple of weeks away from the season. We're talking about when the season starts, but for many conferences, the season has been going on for several weeks, and there's some pretty big games this upcoming weekend. I want to talk first about one out of the ACC, Miami traveling to Clemson, a top 10 matchup. I'm certainly not convinced Miami's a top 10 team, but they sure have been fun to watch. And then, Clemson is Clemson, and they just do what they do. And, how do you see that one before I kind of throw my things on? I think anybody who's a regular listener to the show already kind of knows my prediction on that one.
Yeah, I would like to believe that Derek King and his kind of magic that he's bringing in there in his first year as a starter would be able to push Clemson to the limit, to the brink a little bit. But I mean, I don't really see that happening. Do I hope it happens? Yes, probably. I'm definitely a fan of Derek King, and it is good to see Miami pick up a little steam. It's been a long time. I think people generally like to see that Miami is doing well right now, even if they might be a little inflated in the rankings in terms of those Big Ten teams possibly rising a little bit. Once they're actually playing, or a Pac-12 team jumping in there, who knows? But yeah, I know you're not favoring the Hurricanes there.
No,
and neither am I.
No, Clemson's a 14-point favorite. I mean, they are saying that storms could be in the area for that game. I think that if it becomes a sloppy track, and I'm not saying it is, and I'm not a meteorologist, but if it becomes a sloppy track, I certainly like Travis Etienne versus Cameron Harris, even though, Harris has 5 touchdowns already through the season, 311 yards. But Clemson has been there. Clemson knows how to win these games. It's been a really long time since Miami has won this type of game. Honestly, I don't really know if anybody on the Miami playing roster was alive the last time Miami won a big game. That's not true. I mean, this is 2020, and we can go back to 2001 when they were national champions. But it's been more than a minute since Miami has been relevant. And how big of a stage will this be? It'll be the biggest stage. I mean, this is the 7:30 ABC game. I don't know. I like Clemson to go out there and try and send a message. Clemson has 2 real games of note on its schedule, this Miami game and then a Notre Dame game. And with conferences having the potential of playing various numbers, you need to bring it in these types of stages. So I like Clemson big in that one. Let's jump over to which one do I want to talk about? The SEC. Tennessee, who's a surprising 2-0 in my opinion, traveling to Sanford Stadium in Athens to take on UGA. We got Georgia as like a 12.5-point favorite. They seem to have found something with their with their 5'2" quarterback, Stetson Bennett. Tennessee certainly is taking care of what it's had on its schedule, but I just don't trust Georgia in a lot of games. But I think I like Georgia to win this game, but I think it'll be a little closer than the experts are maybe predicting.
Yeah, well, Georgia did have kind of the big win of last weekend, in an impressive win against Auburn last week. I know we were talking, maybe even last Friday, we were talking about how that game might be a close game or even might even tip in Auburn's favor. Did not work out that way. And that was the only real jockeying in the top 6 or so of the polls even last week, or maybe even more than that, was the fact that Georgia jumped over Florida after that win, because Auburn was the number 7 team. So it made sense in that regard. But Florida looks really good too, with Kyle Trask and Pitts at tight end. So I was a little bit surprised to see Georgia jump Florida in that one. And Florida's got Texas A&M this week as well, number 21. They didn't have an amazing showing against Bama last week. That one was also not quite as close as we thought it might have been. But who knows? Teams do seem to be putting up some points on Florida, though. So with Kellen Mond at quarterback there for Texas A&M, that might be interesting as well. There's a ton of good games this week, to be honest. There's a lot of ranked matchups. I honestly I'm not the expert on Tennessee in that Georgia matchup, so maybe I could throw to you on that one.
Well, and I guess I still have visions of some pretty bad Tennessee teams with either Lane Kiffin or I can't even Dooley when he was there. I mean, they've just kind of had some jokers there. I think they're going to turn the corner. I think when you sit there and you look at their half of the division, I think that they're kind of right there behind the top teams. I think they keep it close, but I'll tell you one thing. I've not been a huge Jared Guarantano fan. I've not felt that he has been the answer there. I think that maybe coming out of high school, he certainly had plenty of potential. But you look at his numbers right now. I mean, he's throwing about 61%. But he's only thrown two touchdowns. I mean, he's 33 of 54 for about 450. They're doing enough to win the games, but there's no margin for error against UGA, and I just don't think they can do it. And then jumping into that Florida A&M game that you mentioned, that's going to be in College Station. Florida's been kind of a polar opposite of what I expected. Florida has always been, well, not always, but as of late, it's been strong defense and just pedestrian offense. And I'm not going to say that their defense has been pedestrian, but they certainly have gotten themselves exposed. I mean, they gave up 35 to Ole Miss, and they gave up 24 to South Carolina. I'll give them more of a pass on the Ole Miss game. Ole Miss has some talent on their team. They certainly have an offensive coach in Lane Kiffin, but South Carolina is kind of just there in the SEC right now. They're not very impressive. They're just I'm not super impressed with anything that Carolina's done for a couple of years there. Then you have A&M on the other side, and you were right. They were not very impressive against Alabama, but if we cast aside every team that hasn't been impressive against Alabama, we'd be dealing with a pretty small number of teams. Right. But I don't know. I don't look as much at that. I look more at that 17-12 win over Vanderbilt, being like, ugh. So Florida's is about a touchdown favorite, 6.5 as of the time we're recording this. I like Florida to win that game by a couple scores. The one game I love talking about is Texas Oklahoma, and normally that's at least a top 15 matchup, if not a top 10. Well, Texas is 22, Oklahoma's unranked. Don't tell a couple of AP voters who had them as high as 21, but just wait for me to go off on my diatribe on Monday's show about how the polls just don't get it. Oklahoma's still a 2.5 point favorite, coming off of 2 straight losses. This is a game that'll be played. Wow. We played at the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. It should be hot. It's supposed to get into the 90s. One team, if Oklahoma loses this, it's a 3-game losing streak, and Katie bar the door, it's going to be bad in Norman. If Texas loses this game, then you're looking at both of your favorites in the conference sitting with 2 conference losses. This is not a good situation for this conference. You only have one undefeated team left with Oklahoma State, and I believe that league is just going to cannibalize itself. When it comes to this game, I don't know. I think that Texas can muster enough offense to really keep Oklahoma on its heels. Oklahoma against Missouri State pitched a shutout. Great. But, then has given up 38 and 37 in the last couple of games. So, if you believe in trends, I don't need to be a stat major to say, well, maybe they'll give up only 36 in this game. And, I don't know. I don't know if Oklahoma is going to be able to score 37 against Texas.
Yeah, and I have watched a lot of Texas and Oklahoma the past few weeks because the games they've been in have just been very exciting. What with the upset element and all the points being scored and whatnot. But yeah, Oklahoma. What was it? Their first time losing back-to-back regular season games since the 90s or something like that? Was that a stat that I saw last week?
I think it was something like that. There have been a lot of stats where Iowa State beating them in Ames for the first time since 1960. So much information out there with all those great stat departments that they all start to run together because we get information overload. Right.
And Texas, oh man, last week fumbling on the 1 yard line at the end of that game. And man, Sam Ehlinger last week with an under 50% completion percentage maybe. Not a great game for a guy that they talk about as Heisman contender of sorts. The second straight year where Texas has kind of started off, people talking about them as a real problem in the Big 12, starting out with kind of a high ranking, and now they've kind of really disappointed in back-to-back years with Tom Herman at the helm there. Losing to TCU for a second straight time. I think TCU has beaten Texas 6 out of the 7 times they've played since they've been in the Big 12 or something like that. But yeah, both of those teams, really underperforming expectations for sure. And I just remember last week watching the end of that the Oklahoma game, and Lincoln Riley is just beside himself, just berating the officials. And there was some weird stuff going on there with that game with the officials at the end, but I just couldn't help but feel like that was him, trying to letting his emotions get the best of him, outside of just being angry at one specific call or whatever. He was just really, channeling all the feedback he's gotten since then. Just knowing that was awaiting him after that loss. And yeah, that game now, it does not mean nearly as much as people would have thought that it would a couple weeks ago. And I don't really believe in Oklahoma State, honestly, either. I know you were saying that you expect the conference to kind of cannibalize itself. Where are they sitting now? Number 10 at 3-0. Yeah, I don't know. Could you imagine Oklahoma State, sitting there with a spot in the college football playoffs? That would kind of blow my mind.
No, I can't imagine that. But, back to this series, Texas overall lead 62-48-5, but Oklahoma has won 4 of the last 5. And since 2010, Texas has only won 3 times. They did play twice in 2018 because they met in the Big 12 championship game. The last win for Texas was in this annual Red River game, a 48-45 win in 2018. I don't know. I like the Horns in this one. I don't know why. I just think that Oklahoma has been exposed, and it has nothing to do with Alex Grinch, 1 year at Ohio State and then, departing and whatever came from all of that. But I like Texas to win this one. I don't know. And, and I want to wrap up on one final game. And there are a lot of ranked games out there, but this one isn't necessarily looking to be close by any stretch of the imagination, but you have Notre Dame hosting Florida State, 7:30 NBC on the Notre Dame network, otherwise known as NBC. Notre Dame a 21-point favorite in that game. And we look at Florida State. Florida State was down by 2 scores to Jacksonville State last week. This game really could get ugly, in my opinion. But then again, I don't trust Notre Dame either. When you sit there and you think that they should be, out doing a lot of right, they just come out and lay an egg. I don't think there's a big enough egg. It would have to be some sort of pterodactyl egg for them to lose this one. But it's a game that I still will be keeping an eye on, just because you just don't know what to expect out of Florida State this year. A team that leads this series, FSU, 6-3, and and they've met last time in 2018, a Notre Dame win, 42-13 in South Bend.
Yeah, in Florida State, 2 losing seasons in a row, and it already looks like they're headed back in that direction this year with another new head coach, already 1-2. Talk about Miami being back. Florida State is on a downward kind of trajectory right now, and yeah, I don't think they're gonna hold much of a chance against the number 5 ranked Notre Dame team this week, no matter how impressive or not impressive Notre Dame has been. That's definitely a lopsided affair for sure. Cannot argue with that at all.
Florida State quarterbacks have thrown for 3 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. James Blackman came in as the starter. I mean, he's under 57% in his completion percentage, averaging 4.6 yards a completion. He's 2-2 in terms of touchdowns and interceptions. Their leading rusher has a $163 at this point. They have 5 rushing touchdowns. It's just, it's a mess. It's a mess. That offensive line has been bad. To add insult to injury, when Mike Norvell ends up coming down with the coronavirus as well, they can't catch a break. And then, on the other side, you look at Notre Dame and you talk about Sam Ehlinger being, this potential Heisman dark horse. And, and I also see Ian Book always thrown into those types of conversations as well. He hasn't necessarily lit it up this year. He's thrown for 407 yards, 62% completion percentage, only thrown for a touchdown and an interception at this point. That's, so I think you look at 2 teams that both have a lot to prove, but, Notre Dame should roll in this one. I mean, Notre Dame didn't play against Wake Forest on the 26th. That game has been postponed. Wins against Duke in South Florida. This is going to be important if Notre Dame is going to position itself to be really in the mix to try and challenge Clemson at the end of the year.
Yeah, and Notre Dame, in terms of the Ohio State lens, is one of those teams that's still kind of keeping them out of the top five right now. If they do come out and have kind of a lackluster performance against a Florida State that has not looked very good, you could see potentially maybe a Notre Dame falling behind Ohio State. Last week several of the Big Ten teams did jump other teams that lost. I was kind of curious to see how that would kind of play out as higher ranked teams would lose, because it is just kind of strange, to have a team that hasn't played, jump several spots. But that's what several teams did, like Michigan, Wisconsin, all jumped 3 spots, I believe. Penn State jumped a spot. Minnesota went from unranked to ranked, but Ohio State was the only team that didn't move up in the Big Ten that was in the rankings. But yeah, if Notre Dame did come out and have kind of a lackluster performance, I could definitely see Ohio State getting back in the top 5 in the rankings in that case.
Well, and I'll say this, and then we'll end the show on that with some final thoughts, is that I think the problem that Ohio State has is you have a finite amount of voters who said they're not going to vote for teams who are not currently playing. So whatever it is, 8, 10, I don't remember how many voters it is off the top of my head who are not going to vote for Ohio State. So ultimately, Ohio State's going to draw 0 points from any of those teams. So it's going to have to come down to there being enough points in terms of the voters who are willing to vote for Ohio State. You have a pair of voters who are voting Ohio State 1 or whatnot. I don't have College Poll Tracker in front of me at the moment to see how low the variance is going, but it's going to be a case of where, more voters are going to have to vote them 1, 2, or 3 to get them to move up. And then once Ohio State's able to play, it'll be interesting to see if after one game, if Ohio State in fact does beat Nebraska, if pollsters are willing to put Ohio State back to where, quote unquote, they rightfully should have been based on preseason rankings, or if Ohio State's going to have to climb the rankings with them. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really mean anything in terms of college football playoff or whatnot, but there certainly is a point of pride in there about rankings, and we see Ohio State having a significant streak snap because of them not being ranked for the couple of weeks. It's all silliness in my opinion.
Yeah, but like I saw recently, I don't know if you saw this, the ESPN RPI or whatever it's called, like percentage for which team is most likely to get to the college football playoff or something like that. They actually favor Ohio State over all other teams in whatever metric that is. That was just an interesting note, considering they haven't played a game yet, and considering that they're 6th in the AP poll.
So I'm sure there are going to be some people who are going to try and put that on the weakness of the Big Ten, but I think that once the Big Ten plays, and if we're able to see all 9 games of the regular season go on, being the 8+1, I think the Big Ten will do a good job of holding its own. But we'll see. But we've gone over 50 minutes here, and there certainly is going to be an opportunity for us to talk to talk more about this, as the show is up to 3 times a week. But any closing thoughts for you, Griffin, before I put a big bow on this one and send it off into the interwebs?
Yeah, happy Friday to everyone out there. I'm about to head off a couple hours away in the middle of nowhere, Ohio, to my dad's place. I plan on watching quite a bit of college football this weekend, hoping to see some good games, and I'm looking forward to another week of Ohio State coverage going into next week.
Sounds great. Next week we will roll out our projected depth charts, not based on anything that the university has said, just based on what we think. We're still kind of going round and round, but plan on seeing that next week, and we'll start really ramping things up. And then the following week, it's Nebraska week, and we will start breaking down the Huskers and have all of that great content that everybody is used to seeing at Buckeye Grove, as the Big Ten will finally be back. But I want to thank you all for listening to us. For Griffin, I'm Kevin. This is the BIA podcast, and have a wonderful and safe weekend.
Be sure to stay up to date with Buckeye Grove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game, exclusively at buckeyegrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcasts Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to click on that subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing, and come visit us over at BuckeyeGrove.com for all the best Ohio State information on the web.